So one slide here on attacks on the science panel, just so you can see how. And I want to, and this is a group that, to me, at the end of my report, I really felt that they're a key piece of the story of what we found when we dug through all the documents to explain how they did their playbook. And Genetic Literacy Project is, maybe some of you have heard of it. It's been around since, well, I think it's been a big project since about 2015, when the industry started to really get serious about trying to win the public over on GMOs. It's run by a guy who's for 20 years been, attacking anyone who talks about chemical risk. His name's John Entine. And they have incredible, I don't know why, in some circles, legitimacy. They did partnerships with University of Florida and UC Davis. At one point, UC Davis was giving them office space. They were letting John Entine teach science courses. It's a group that said they were independent, but a long history of, and documents started to come out showing they partnered directly with Monsanto on this, that, and the other. And they really have this very aggressive attack strategy. And these attacks are coming in some cases from straight up climate science denialists. So here's a group that claims to be pro-science. They describe themselves as pro-science. The Monsanto papers describe them as pro-science. They're pro-science friends and front groups, or friends in this case. They recently, Bayer is now on record as funding this group directly, but for a long time they said they didn't take corporate funding. So here's just an example of the kind of like hysterical headlines. This cancer agency is full of corruption, distortion, fraud. These independent scientists studying the causes of cancer are in it for personal profit and ideological vanity. They lied to Congress. Corruption, secrecy, activist group, insults upon insults of individual scientists and the group. So this was the aggressive front group strategy. Front group in the middle, connected to lots of entities in food, public relations, in university departments, genetic engineering. There are some documents with them talking with the US government about government-sponsored programs and videos that basically teach scientists and activists to promote and defend chemicals and GMOs in the ways that these groups are teaching. In one case, this guy was outright teaching a 3-day, they called it a boot camp, to teach journalists and scientists how to promote and defend GMOs. So a front group that full-on attacks cancer researchers in the voices of climate science denialists, yet has the platform of prestigious universities and the US government. That's the story of Genetic Literacy Project. And that's why I say, in some ways, these guys have it going better than even the tobacco industry and even the fossil fuel industry in terms of the legitimacy that they do not deserve and yet somehow have. So, okay, this I just point out whenever I can to show they're actually quite closely tied to the climate science denialists, but they're also, as you'll see in the next slide, like dominating the Google news search. And I've done this sort of a search more times than I would care to admit over the last few years, and it's often the same. I do it with new browsers and new computers, doesn't matter. So it's not a tracking history thing. They are often, very often, at the top of the Google News search on any given day for topics of importance to the pesticide industry. So it might be, for example, like Mexico is trying to ban GMOs and glyphosate. Big uproar. If you search for Mexico and GMOs on that day, up comes a whole bunch of articles from the Genetic Literacy Project. So I've done this with various sources: cancer and glyphosate, pesticides in food, GMOs in Africa, And you'll see they're not just the first on the second, but the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth hits on Google News, like again and again. So how do they do that? We've studied it quite a bit. It has to do with the amount of content they put out, the way they do their SEO, lots of effort and money, no doubt, going to that. It's really pretty much coloring outside the lines quite a bit as far as I can tell, because what they also do is they take mainstream news articles about these topics, say Bloomberg or the New York Times has a piece, or even me, I've had articles, they just rip them off and post them on Genetic Literacy Project. And he'll reach out to me and say, is it okay if I republish your piece? Say no. And then he says, well, too bad. And up it goes. So they're saying that they have fair use of the articles, but what they will also do is change the headline, change the image, all very SEO friendly, condense the paragraph, condense the entire article to key paragraphs that really help bolster certain talking points that are useful to the pesticide industry. And then they will intersperse some of these articles with their own disclaimers and editor's notes. So you'll see, for example, and I wrote about this in the report, but they posted a press release from the California Attorney General, which was essentially arguing that glyphosate should be labeled as a carcinogen, but a judge stopped that from happening in California. And so the Attorney General writes a press release about that, and right after the beginning of the paragraph, under his name with his byline, is a big disclaimer that like nobody agrees with this guy, or nobody agrees with California, or whatever. You get the point. It's just like talking points and narrative promotions throughout articles that they're ripping straight off from other publications. So in this way, they stay constantly atop the Google search. And I think this kind of thing is something that the environmental health movement, journalists need to get a lot better at seeing and confronting and figuring out how to deal with, because of course, most of us are getting our, at least, research path from going to Google News or Google. And there's lots of studies that most people only look at the first few or the first page, and then like nothing else on the internet matters. So, there's lots coming down the pike, and we just scratched the surface of it with our report about new media, the new media information battle. And now with AI and videos that can be doctored so easily, it's like really going to be interesting to figure out how to get a handle on disinformation, how to keep the record straight, get the truth out, challenge corporate power abuse, which is I would consider this example to be. And yeah, if anyone has ideas on how to do that with Google News, and in this particular example, I would love to hear it. And I think so part of that is what can we do collectively, but to bring it back to, there's a whole lot we can also do individually, in the sense of understanding the scope of this and how companies come at our thought systems, and how we can understand that when we see it, how we can do our due diligence on research to understand who's behind a group like the Genetic Literacy Project. What's the motivation of the type of information they share? How is it that a huge bully, literally bully, who attacks scientists and scientific research as an institution, how do they get legitimacy on platforms like Google News and UC Davis and the US government? And how can we challenge that? So lots of questions for us. And will admittedly say I'm big on understanding the problem, and it's a lot harder to figure out what do we do for a solution. We do offer lots of thoughts on that in the Merchants of Poison report about how it's important to challenge the media, to be in touch with media, to deal with scientific journals, to demand transparency at universities. Really, basically, wherever any of us sit in our work lives or in the economy, there's something we can do to challenge the narratives that are coming at us, look deeper into where they're coming from, what are the motivations, and encourage others to really get trained up in media literacy, however we can do it, and to share those tools and resources with each other. For the closing here, and I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm just going to tell one more story that brings us back to the Proposition 37 ballot initiative to label GMOs. So that was the first of 4 attempts to get voters to agree that we should label GMOs. And at that time, and every poll was consistent, most people agreed. Most people want to know what's in their food. Most people, no matter what their political persuasion, believe in transparency, believe in having the information that we need to make the decisions for ourselves about what we eat and feed our families. Now, there was a huge effort against those campaigns, and we tracked at one point, this was in a report that my colleague Gary wrote called Seedy Business, who was funding. It was Monsanto in the lead, but there was a very long list. I only have here everyone that donated over $1 million. So you see all your pesticide companies, Dow, Syngenta, BASF, the grocery manufacturers, lots of processed food companies are straight in with the pesticide companies on the industrial food chain. The whole system is of one piece, from the GMO, pesticide, corn and soy, monocultures, industrial commodity crops that are most of the time not being used to feed people. They're being used primarily to feed cows, animal feed, cars, through biofuels, and also processed food factories. So I want to put a radar up here about, we're hearing lots of messages from food companies, pesticide companies, entities like the Gates Foundation, governments in some cases, lots of investors, huge funded groups, all telling us that cell-cultured meats and processed foods are the key to solving climate change. I think that's hugely problematic for a lot of reasons, but the primary one being that we know very clearly through the science, and you've heard a lot about it at this conference, I'm sure, that ultra-processed food is one of the main harms to our health. It linked to all sorts of things, from cardiac problems to early death, for a very strong body of science. And so ultra-processed foods, and the way in they're being presented as a climate solution, is just a way to greenwash the system we already have and somehow make the claim that by doubling down on this system, we can feed people when we can't feed them now, and fix the climate when the system is currently making it worse. So there's a lot of magical thinking involved in, if we just, build huge factories for processed foods, we're going to fix these problems. It's just another pipeline for the industrial commodity crop GMO pesticide food system. What are we going to do with all that corn and soy, cows, cars, and ultra-processed food factories? Okay, so that's the system we're fighting against. I wanted to end with a little bit of good news. So I mentioned that the lines reversed on this, the graph from hell, to where we actually won on election day. So in other words, the green line went up and the red line went down, and they crossed. But unfortunately, we didn't win enough votes to make up for the votes we lost in early voting. So we still lost the ballot initiative by, I think it was 1.5 percentage points. But the green line went back up, and how that happened was, I think, one of the most fascinating stories that I've seen in this field of that I've been doing this, which is now way too long. ready to move on to new things. But I think there's a lesson here in how that happened, how that green line went back up. And that was that we had raised enough money on the Yes campaign to advertise for 10 days. And so we started advertising and on TV, and that's what caused the line to go back up. But the what we would advertise was a big source of course, arguments and debates and robust discussions, because it was one 30-second ad. And what can you do in 30 seconds? Well, you certainly can't explain everything that I just took an hour and 15 minutes to explain. You really don't have time to say very much. So the plan for how we were going to decide on what 30-second ad was down to focus group testing. They called them dial tests, and it was hundreds of people looked at a bunch of different ads that the campaign had produced. We had done video ads, and we hadn't actually run anything on TV, but a lot of ads were produced that were running online. There were ads talking about the evils of pesticides. There were celebrity ads with Danny DeVito and lots of well-known celebrities saying to vote for Prop 37. There were Monsanto Agent Orange, sort of dark evil entity ads. So 7 or 8 different ads were run through this test. And the idea was that people would respond emotionally with this dial that they had to whether they were positively or negatively associating with certain messages and certain ads, and then on all these different criteria. And then at the end, they would put together the winning messages into one new ad. So they ran through this process, and a lot of people were super excited about the celebrity ad, the anti-pesticide ad. We've got to tell people in 30 seconds, like all the bad that is happening with this industry. But when they ran the test, the consultants came back and said, we are really surprised by these results. But there was one ad that outperformed all the other ads in all of the categories, so much so that we just have to use this ad, and it's not even a question. The theme of the ad was food is love. And it was an ad that came from a woman that I had interviewed for the campaign, who said, I don't want to see all these images of food on your website. I want to see people. Food is about people. Food is love. Food is my family connecting with me. And I just thought that was a truth. That was a real truth about health and life, that food is a way that we connect with each other through love. And with that message, food is love, a mom serving her family food, and we have a right to know what's in it, was so successful that not only did our green line shoot back up, but at the end of the entire 4 campaigns, where, as I pointed out in the previous slide, Monsanto and the food company spent over $100 million, including the best polling money can buy, the best messaging experts. They released a new ad campaign. They had business cards, they had ads, and the theme was food is love. So what a couple of women moms could come up with, it was no match for all of the corporate PR teams trying to figure out how to convince us what we want for our food system. And that part gives me so much hope. And it's why I do the work that I do, because shining light on these systems, understanding them, and just speaking the truth in the face of them, it always wins. It carries so much power that the companies have to implement all of these tricks, spend all of the money, do all of the dirty deeds that I just talked about, just to confront the truth. So for all of us here, and that's why I love this conference, speaking the real truth about health is the most powerful thing we can do, and we just will all got to keep doing it louder and braver and stronger. So may we all speak about the real truth, and food is love, and we need to change our food system to love our planet and our families. Thank you all so much. And I'm done, and I'm going to take a break and let people ask me questions. I can't hear you, Michael.
Oops, sorry about that. Thank you, Stacy, for that very powerful presentation. That was that last story was definitely inspiring. So, so we're going to begin our question and answer session with the audience. And before I do, just want I guess you're pointing out all the various places that that they can find you and find out more about all of your work and the projects that you're working on. Where can they get your book?
So Merchants of Poison is actually a report that's free online for anyone. Merchants of Poison, I do have the URL, but it's not operational yet. It's at usrtk.org on the homepage, or you can go to bit.ly/Merchants of Poison. Print it out. I also have all of the chapters of it on our website. So it's in HTML, lots of documents, tons of links. There's over, I think, 500 footnotes. Everything is just like, tied to a document and to a reputable source. So it's just very, very well researched and footnoted. So yeah, and you can find it at usrtk.org. And please sign up for our newsletter. I should also say, for those interested, we're doing a major investigation into the origins of COVID, and we've put into the public a lot of documents about the debates going on between scientists, what they were saying behind the scenes versus what was said in public. A really important story about how we can protect ourselves against the next pandemic. So lots of good reporting, and we put out our news from our investigation every week in a newsletter, along with some of the best public health news in science that is emerging, which is a lot. Like daily, we have new science coming out, pointing out the links between the environment and products we use and our health.
Thank you for sharing that information. So we're now going to begin our live Q&A session. What I'm going to explain exactly how it works. We don't take questions directly from chat. What we will do is have people raise their hands virtually. If you're not sure how to do this, what you need to do is click on the reactions button at the bottom right of the Zoom window, and then click on raise hand from the menu that pops up. When I call your name, I will unmute you and ask you to state where you're from and to ask your question. We ask that everyone keep their questions brief and on topic. So with that said, I'm going to take a question from the audience here, and that's going to come from Bin Wu. Bin Wu, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, hello, and thank you for your great, the best lecture for me. I'm from the Maryland. So my question is, I thought you talk about the sunlight is about the best infectator, the sunlight. But how can we use this sunlight to because if we got too much sunlight, we will get the skin cancer. So how can we use this sunlight to protect us, to get a benefit from the sunlight?
Thank you for that. Yes, it is a good idea to use sunscreen. And if you're going to use sunscreen, you can, this is another topic that I've worked on, which was chemicals in personal care products. But then I'll get to your question, which is, I think, a bigger than this. But just to mention that sunscreens are often toxic or don't work. So a really good resource to find the best sunscreens is Environmental Working Group's sunscreen report that they do every year. But on the topic just of sunlight in general, I just truly believe that transparency is so important for all the work we do. Let's just put it out, put the facts out into the light, and let's have a real debate.
How
and see
many?
where it goes. I mean, there's so much, for example, on the COVID-19 origins example, like scientists just really didn't think the public should be involved in questioning where did the pandemic come from. And I just think that's really wrong and really dangerous. So we need to be having a public discussion about what is known in the science and what the facts are.
How many hour? How many hours can we get the sunlight every day, or just?
Well, you mean like actual sunlight?
Yeah, actually.
That's yeah. I think some sunlight is good, but you don't want too much.
All right.
I'm not really an expert on that topic, but yeah. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. All right. So, so you mentioned the Gates Foundation, and I know you've done work into that. You talked about it's about their interventions into Africa. What kind of stuff is the Gates Foundation doing in Africa, and what is concerning about it?
Yeah, well, the Gates Foundation is, of course, a super powerful organization, one of the biggest philanthropy organizations in the world, and one of the leading funders of development dollars to Africa around agriculture. So they've spent about, I think, almost $6 million on agricultural development. And unfortunately, it's all, almost all of it, programs to expand industrial agriculture. And Africa is one of the last, huge land masses. And of course, we're talking about many, many countries that haven't shifted to industrial commodity crops systems. Basically, lots of people still doing traditional farming, growing variety of foods. And the Gates Foundation's programs are really aimed at transitioning that, expanding industrial, larger farms, growing corn and soy, farms that depend on fertilizers, which are harming the climate, on pesticides, which are causing lots of health and environmental problems, to grow corn and soy, which, as I said earlier, not the food that's feeding people, but it's, for the market, which often means cows, cars, and ultra-processed food factories. So they're pushing this system over the objections of many, many groups, farmers, agroecology movements, faith leaders in Africa who have for years been trying to raise objections to the foundation, ignored, dismissed. There's no accountability, no transparency. There's just sort of like a dogma. A bill says it's good, so it must be good, kind of. That's the system. It's really problematic in so many ways. And as you said, I've done a lot of reporting on it. usrtk.org, we have a section on Bill Gates that talks about Gates' investments and his climate perspectives and what the foundation's doing, particularly in Africa. So lots of reporting there, and we have a new report coming out soon. So more to be said on that.
And a little closer to home, he's buying a lot of farmland in the United States. It's been reported. Why is he doing that, and why should we be concerned with that?
So yeah, he's one of the largest private farmland owners in the U.S. He's very clear about why he did it. When on Reddit, people asked him on Reddit, he said, because my investment firm told me to. It's a good investment. If you're looking through all of what Bill is doing, investments and also philanthropically, it's a wealth maximization model. It's like what's good for the investors, what's good for my investments, what's good for my friends, what's good for patents and intellectual property rights is what is going to feed the world. And the data, though, doesn't back that up, but they're not looking at the data that's not supporting what they do. And he also, of course, has a lot of influence over media. So there's not a lot of people criticizing Bill Gates, and especially in the US. There is quite a bit of pushback in the African press. And I just recently saw that the Gates Foundation was putting a lot of money into paying journalists in Africa. So they're really trying to paper over the facts to keep the system going that's working for them, versus listen to the people and the farmers who live in Africa and who are saying they want something different. And the reason it's a problem is yeah, we don't want Bill Gates owning all the farmland in the US. Some people think, well, maybe he's going to do something amazing with it. But he said himself, it's an investment. I'm doing it because I can get a return on my investment. And the way they do that is by growing corn, soy, or monocultures of something. And I think actually I read recently growing potatoes and selling them to McDonald's as French fries in the case of some of the Gates land that he owns in the US.